In this presentation, we're going to discuss basic concepts in motivation. We're going to start by discussing exactly what motivation is with a formal definition, and then we're going to move to one of the most basic ideas of motivation, which are human needs. Before we get started, I would like you to answer a few questions about motivation. First, when were you most motivated to do something? And second, why were you motivated so much? So take a few minutes, jot down your answers, pause the video, and when you're finished, press play on the slideshow again. Before we move to a definition of motivation, let's start with indicators that tell you whether or not someone is motivated. Mayer has several behavioral indicators, including direction of behavior, such as what choices an individual makes, persistence, if they give extended effort, especially in the face of challenges, activity level, continuing motivation, that is the likelihood that they return to the task, and performance. I'd add level of cognitive engagement and learning, the amount of attention that they give to a task, and the amount of elaboration. So how do we define motivation? Well, we all know what it is. We all know it when we see it. When we see somebody working hard, we know they're motivated. But few of us have a formal definition. So before I give you a couple definitions, what I want you to do is pause the video and take a couple minutes to write your own definition. What do you think? What does motivation mean to you? So now that you've written your own definition, let's move to a more formal definition. Literally, motivation is from the Latin verb movere, to move. Let's start with this first definition. Motivation is the process whereby goal-directed activity is instigated and sustained. In other words, when you're moving towards a goal and you start moving towards the goal and the behavior that moves you towards that goal is maintained over time. This is one definition of motivation. Here's a second. Motivation is a psychological construct used to explain an individual's choice of actions, the level of effort and cognitive engagement expended on those actions, the persistence of those actions over time, and the emotional responses to those actions. Now, what I want to point out is these are two very different definitions, and which one you adopt is really up to you. But it's important that you do adopt a definition or that you use your own. And the reason that I want you to adopt a definition or use your own is because when you're trying to motivate your students, you should have an operational definition of what it is to you within your mind. Next, the goals that individuals pursue create the framework within which they interpret and react to events. So why do people set, instigate, or sustain goals? This is the question that motivational researchers seek to answer. More specifically, those who study motivation are looking for the factors that explain choice of action, effort, and persistence. Please note, there is no single motive or motivator that explains the complexity of human behavior. And remember, motivation is a psychological construct. It has no concrete existence, no physical embodiment in the brain, and you can't see it. It's something that happens in the mind, and we use instruments to try to study it. So now that we have our own definition and a formal definition of motivation, let's move to this really basic concept related to motivation, which are needs. Murray posited a large list of needs that drive human motivation and behavior. Well, I'm not going to go through all of these. If you'd like to pause the video, you can go ahead and read through them all. However, what's important here is that there are many, many needs that drive behavior. A more widely known theory of human motivation is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Within this hierarchy, he suggests that there's basic to more complex needs, and that we need to satisfy the more basic needs, which are located lower on this pyramid, before we can move up to the more complex needs. At the bottom, you have physiological needs such as breathing, food, water. Then you move up to safety. Once you've satisfied the physiological needs, then you can start to be concerned with safety needs such as security or employment. When those are satisfied, you can move to the love and belonging needs, which include friendship and family and intimacy. Once those are satisfied, you can start to think about self-esteem needs, which include confidence and achievement. And finally, at the top of Maslow's hierarchy is self-actualization, which include things like morality and creativity and problem solving. However, few individuals ever reach self-actualization because all of the needs below it, physiological, safety, love and belonging, and esteem, need to be met before an individual can move into this self-actualization phase. According to Maslow, ideally, all individuals would move into the phase of self-actualization because these people have a more efficient perception of reality and more comfortable relations with it. Self-actualizing people distinguish far more easily than most the fresh, concrete, and idiosyncratic from the generic, abstract, and ready-made. The consequence is that they live more in the real world than in the man-made set of concepts, expectations, beliefs, and stereotypes which most people confuse with the world. They can tolerate the ambiguous, and thus ideal learning can occur. Maslow argues that the basic needs form a hierarchy. And what does that mean? That means that if everything is equal, the most basic needs, physiological needs, will exert the strongest influence on action. When satisfied, the next need exerts the greatest influence, and all the way up the pyramid until you reach self-actualization. So how rigid or fixed is the hierarchy? Well, it's considered semi-rigid. Shifts can occur. Partial need satisfaction is typical, in fact more typical than complete satisfaction. So even if you partially meet your safety needs, you can then move on to love and belonging needs. Recently, researchers have extended Maslow's hierarchy with some really important implications for education. And so as you can see, the bottom half of the pyramid looks very similar. You have this physiological needs, safety, belonging and love, and esteem needs. However, there are some differences up top. They have added needs such as cognitive, aesthetic, and transcendence. And while I won't go into what all of them are, what's really important here is this cognitive need. Now, this cognitive need includes things like learning and motivation, especially in schools. Now, also, they added this deficiency needs and growth needs. And basically what they're saying is that this bottom half of the pyramid are deficiency needs. And if you don't meet or satisfy these needs, you can't move up into the growth needs. So what are the implications for teaching? Well, if one doesn't feel like, or if one feels hungry or thirsty, or they don't feel safe either when they go home or at school, they don't have any friends and they don't feel like they belong, or if they have low self-esteem, well, guess what? Now they're deficient and they can't move on to these growth needs, including cognitive needs, which can greatly hinder learning and motivation. So now let's finish with the teaching implications from today's lecture on the intro to motivation and basic needs. First, know indicators of motivation. If you can see these indicators in your students, you can capitalize on them and increase motivation and achievement. Help students to recognize and set goals. Do this explicitly. And last, remember that these lower needs, physiological, safety, esteem needs, are deficiency needs. They must be partially met before growth needs can emerge. And an important growth need is cognitive need, which includes learning and motivation.